A hermit, a bar fight, an offer that can't be refused, and a nightmare. Chapters 2, 3, and 4 of Blood Meridian. Welcome to What the F Does This Even Mean, Blood Meridian. I'm Amy and I'm the HBIC, head bibliophile in charge around here. This is the second video in my series on Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. In the last video, I introduced you to Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, discussed what first pages tell us, and then took a very deep dive into the first page and sections of the first chapter. This video will be following chapters 2, 3, and 4. In chapter 1, we left off with the kid starting the hotel on fire with Toadvine and getting out of Dodge as quickly as he could. As he is leaving town, he takes one last look back to see the judge watching him, and the judge smiles. Chapter 2 starts off with the kid wandering around the countryside alone with his mule. He is forced to beg and steal. He is intentionally trying to avoid the roads. He sees a fire burning and comes across the home of a hermit. McCarthy describes the man first as an anchorite, which is a type of religious recluse that have interesting history in the Middle Ages. He later refers to him in the passage as a hermit. He is also described as half mad. He shares water with the boy and invites him in to stay the night because of storms coming in. The hermit talks to the boy about life. "Lost ye way in the dark," said the old man. He stirred the fire, standing slender tufts of bone up out of the ashes. The kid didn't answer. The old man swung his head back and forth. "The way of the transgressor is hard. God made this world, but he didn't make it to suit everybody, did he? I don't believe he much had me in mind." Said the old man. "But where does a man come by his notions? What world's he seen that he liked better? I can think of better places and better ways. Can he make it be? No, it's a mystery. A man's at odds to know his mind, 'cause his mind is aught he has to know it with. He can know his heart, but he don't want to, rightly so. Best not to look in there. It ain't the heart of a creature that is bound in the way that God has set for it. You can find meanness in the least of creatures, but when God made man, the devil was at his elbow. A creature that can do anything, make a machine, and a machine to make the machine. An evil that can run itself 1,000 years, no need to tend to it. You believe that? I don't know. Believe that." This passage is really interesting to me for a few reasons. As it starts, the hermit isn't only talking about the kid being physically lost, but also morally lost. We learn that when his next words talk about the hard life of the transgressor, and he's using a statement, not a question. When the kid says, "I don't believe he much had me in mind, and I can think of better places and better ways," we finally get insight into the kid, his thoughts, and how he views his life from his own perspective. Until this point, we have just been given information about the kid and his journey. We finally hear his thoughts on his lot in life. It's like he becomes a real boy in this conversation that he has with the hermit. Another really interesting thing about this passage to me is when the hermit says, "A man's at odds to know his mind, 'cause his mind is aught he has to know it with." A man cannot know his own mind because it's only with his own mind he can know it. I think this gives us something really interesting to ponder. Lastly, it's important to remember that Blood Meridian takes place for the most part in the mid-1800s. Just as the Industrial Revolution was coming to an end and manual labor was beginning to be replaced by machines. He gives us a very grim view of humanity and progress here, as well as man's nature. Later, the hermit opens up to the kid about his life in Mississippi and being a slaver. This is where race begins to really play a role in this novel. I'm warning you, some of it's pretty difficult to read. He tells the kid that there are 4 things that are going to destroy the world. The kid wakes up in the middle of the night to find the hermit standing over him and watching him sleep. At first light, not seeing the hermit anywhere in sight, the kid gets the hell out. He wanders some more and comes across some cattle herders that welcome him into their camp. He tells them he's been robbed. They talk about their work, even offer to take him on. In the conversation, he learns about Brexer. The herders lost some of their crew to a group heading down there to take Mexico drink and some prostitutes on. This is where the kid decides to go. The next morning, they feed him breakfast and take off. When he goes to his mule, he finds the herders left for him a bag with dried beans, peppers, and a knife. This is a passage that always stood out to me because even though things were wild, violent, and chaotic in the Southwest at the time, here was a group that offered him kindness and a choice. He rejected it. He turned down life among them for a life familiar to him with booze, prostitutes, and other vices. The hermit told the boy that there were 4 things that can destroy the earth. 3 of the things the other herders left the group to pursue: money, whiskey, and women. The kid follows a cart full of corpses into town and goes into a bar. He is out of money and offers to clean the bar in exchange for a drink. Even after he has put the work in, the bartender will not give him his drink. "How about that drink now?" said the kid. The barman stood. The kid made the drinking motions that the old man had made, and the barman flapped his towel idly at him. "Andale," he said. He made a shooing motion with the back of his hand. The kid's face clouded. "You son of a bitch," he said. He started down the bar. The barman's expression did not change. He brought up from under the bar an old-fashioned military pistol with a flint lock and shoved back the cock with the heel of his hand. A great wooden clicking in the silence. A clicking of glasses all down the bar. Then the shuffling of chairs pushed back by the players at the wall. The kid froze. "Old man," he said. The old man didn't answer. There was no sound in the cafe. The kid turned to find him with his eyes. "Borracho," said the old man. The boy watched the barman's eyes. The barman waved the pistol towards the door. The old man spoke to the room in Spanish. Then he spoke to the barman. Then he put on his hat and went out. The barman's face drained. When he came around the end of the bar, he had laid down the pistol and he was carrying a bung starter in one hand. The kid backed to the center of the room and the barman labored over the floor towards him like a man on his way to some chore. He swung twice at the kid and the kid stepped twice to the right. Then he stepped backward. The barman froze. The kid boosted himself lightly over the bar and picked up the pistol. No one moved. He raked the frizzen open against the bar top and dumped the priming out and laid the pistol down again. Then he selected a pair of full bottles from the shelves behind him and he came around the end of the bar with one in each hand. The barman stood in the center of the room. He was breathing heavily and he turned, following the kid's movements. When the kid approached him, he raised the bung starter. The kid crouched lightly with the bottles and fainted and then broke the right one over the man's head. Blood and liquor sprayed, and the man's knees buckled and his eyes rolled. The kid had already let go the bottleneck, and he pitched the second bottle into his right hand in a road agent's pass before it even reached the floor, and he backhanded the second bottle across the barman's skull and crammed the jagged remnant into his eye as he went down. The kid looked around the room. Some of those men wore pistols in their belts, but none moved. The kid vaulted the bar, and he took another bottle and tucked it under his arm and walked out the door. The dog was gone. The man on the bench was gone. He untied the mule and led it across the square. I think this passage is really important and builds on things we learned in Chapter 1. I need you to stick with me here because I'm getting to a bigger point, I promise. Chapter 1 opens up telling us that a taste for violence lives within the kid. To this point, the only violence we see him participate in are the fights he gets into in New Orleans. Even then, though, McCarthy adds the line, "The child's face is curiously untouched behind the scars, the eyes oddly innocent." In Nachidoches, once violence starts in the tent, the boy flees. His fight with Toadvine results in a standoff. At the hotel, the kid doesn't know what to do. Toadvine has to tell him to kick Sydney in the head. Even then, he hesitates. Possibly he knows the violence that is inside Toadvine. I mean, he was just going to kill the kid for not moving out of his path. So the kid is backed in the corner, and that is why he acts against Sydney. When he wakes up to the Hermit over him, he doesn't act violently. He makes sure the Hermit is gone before he leaves. And now the bartender pulled a gun on him and chases after him with a hammer. It isn't until he's cornered that he returns violence and ends up killing the bartender. I mean, he had access to the gun and he didn't use it. I think this is something important to make note of in these earlier chapters as we journey forward with the kid and he grows into his manhood. Remember the line from the first page, "The child, the father of the man"? I also think it asks a bigger question. Can someone have violence living in them without being violent? At what point does the violence take over and it stops being a state of being and becomes an act of doing? The kid spends the night in a church. When he wakes up hungover, his donkey is gone. This is the second time his donkey has wandered off in search for water in this chapter. I'm not sure if there's any significance to that or not, but it did stick out to me. He wanders around, finally finding his donkey, and the chapter closes with him washing in a river. Chapter 3 opens up when the kid is lying naked under the trees when he is approached by a spiffed up man on a beautiful horse. The kid automatically reaches for his knife, but he doesn't need it. As long as the kid is the person that killed the bartender, the spiffed up man, who we later find out is Sergeant Trammell, has an offer the kid can't refuse. Come fight in Mexico for Captain White for a chance to raise his stock in the world. Interesting to note that we are living in a world where if you murder a man, you get rewarded. This theme appears later throughout the book. "I've been in Texas since '38. If I not run up on Captain White, I don't know where I be this day. I was a sorrier sight even than what you are, and he comes along and raised me up like Lazarus, set my feet in the path of righteousness. I done took to drinking and whoring till hell won't have me. He seen something in me worth saving, and I see it in you. What do ye say? We have another biblical allusion here with the reference to Lazarus. I'm not going to point out each one throughout this book because this book is layered with them, but I think this one is interesting because it could have a bit of a double meaning. Trammell is referring to the miracle Jesus performed in chapter 11 of the book of John, when Jesus raised Lazarus of Bethany from the dead after 4 days. But there's also a parable about a different Lazarus in the New Testament's book of Luke. The rich man and Lazarus is a parable about a rich man that treats a poor man badly and the consequences each face by how they live their life. Trammell is the rich man here, while the kid is the poor man. It's an interesting visual, especially since Trammell is there to recruit him for Captain White. The kid goes with Trammell and meets with Captain White. Captain White looks at him and asks how he got into the situation he's in. The kid is embarrassed by his poverty and lies to Captain White, telling him he came upon robbers. This is the second time the kid has told this lie. This time, though, he throws the group of herders that were kind to him under the bus and says it was them. The captain asks the kid questions about the war, Mexico, and his stance on things. The kid is ignorant of anything going on outside his own survival. Day by day, he's just trying to stay alive. The kid negotiates new clothes, a horse, rifle, and saddle, and Captain White agrees to hook him up if he joins. They take the kid to the camp with the other members of the party. They spend the day acquiring the items the kid needs. That night, they go to the bar where they see a Mennonite. The Mennonite warns them about their mission. They tell him to stay in his own lane. The next morning, Earl, one of the new recruits that went to the bar with them, is dead. The Mennonite tells them there is no such joy in the tavern as upon the road thereto, meaning there's more joy on the road to the tavern than in the tavern itself, offering a bit of foreshadowing to what troubles are yet to come. He puts on his hat and he leaves. Chapter 4 begins 5 days later with the kid on Dead Earl's horse. 2 people get sick, then another, and one more. 10 days out, 4 men have died from illness. Travel becomes more difficult. They are followed by packs of wolves, the terrain demanding on people, animals, and wagons. The heat is merciless. They begin traveling at night. All night the wind blew and the fine dust set their teeth on edge. Sand and everything, grit and all they ate. In the morning, a urine-colored sun rose blearily through panes of dust on a dim world without feature. The animals were failing. They halted and made a dry camp without wood or water, and the wretched ponies huddled and whimpered like dogs. The thunder moved from the southwest, and lightning lit the desert all about them, blue and barren. Great clanging reaches ordered out of the absolute night like some demon kingdom summoned up or changeling land that come the day would leave them neither trace nor smoke nor ruin more than any troubling dream. Descriptive passages like this are why I love McCarthy's writing. I can feel the sand, I can taste the grit. I can imagine this demon kingdom being exposed to them in the dark with the flashing light from the lightning and the fear of no shelter, the energy it produces in the air. For me, passages like this make this book so atmospheric. It's like a gauzy dream that turns into a nightmare. The men come upon a hut with a stable and an enclosure, but no one is in sight. They know someone has recently been there, though, because the coals in the fire are still warm. He sends his men out to find the people that were there, food for the horses, and water. They find the man in the stable. He's pretty worked up, babbling and urinating himself. Captain White writes him off as being a half-wit. They spend the night. The next morning, the man is gone. As they continue on, the terrain begins to change, almost like another level of hell, and they pass through a village that has been left in ruins, spending the night behind the walls of a tall church. The next day they carry on. Captain White spies with his little eye and a brass telescope what he thinks is a large herd of horses. He orders his translator forward to explain the herd and what it can mean. Candelario, the translator, doesn't know. They move forward. As they get closer, they see the herd is made up of several thousand cattle, mules, and horses, oversaw by a dozen or so men, Indians, maybe Mexicans. Captain White thinks the livestock is probably stolen and doesn't think the drovers seem too concerned with his presence. He is aware and ready, though. The captain smiled grimly. We may see a little sport here before the day is out. As White's men approach the herd, they see that the ponies are painted with hands, suns, birds, fishes, and other patterns. They hear a lot of noise. On a hillside, there appear thousands of these ponies. On their backs, Comanche warriors. A legion of horribles, hundreds in number. Half naked and clad in costumes, attic or biblical or wardrobed out of a fevered dream, with the skins of animals and silk finery and pieces of uniform still tracked with the blood of prior owners. Coats of slain dragoons, frogged and braided cavalry jackets, one in a stovepipe hat, and one with an umbrella, and one in white stockings and a blood-stained wedding veil, and some in headgear of crane feathers or rawhide helmets that bore the horns of bulls or buffalo, and one in a pigeon-tailed coat worn backwards and otherwise naked, and one in the armor of a Spanish conquistador, the breastplate and pauldrons deeply dented with old blows of mace and saber done in another country by men whose very bones were dust, and many of their braids spliced up with the hair of other beasts until they trailed upon the ground, and their horses' ears and tails worked with bits of brightly colored cloth, and one whose horse's whole head was painted crimson red, and all the horsemen's faces gaudy and grotesque with the doblins, like a company of mounted clowns, death hilarious, all howling in a barbarous tongue and riding down upon them like a horde from hell, more horrible yet than the brimstone land of Christian reckoning, screeching and yammering and clothed in smoke like those vaporous beings in regions beyond right knowing, where the eye wanders and the lip jerks and drools. What a passage. I think what McCarthy is telling us here in this description of the clothing tells the reader that violence is a part of all people's history, from the uniforms with the blood of its former owner still on it, to the cavalry jackets, to the bloody wedding veil, to the rawhide helmets made from bull's horns, to the breastplates of the Spanish conquistador. War and violence have been a part of man's nature for hundreds and thousands of years, and no one was really safe from it. I am only going to read parts of the battle scene here that stick out to me, but I highly recommend that you read this passage closely. Once, twice, a few more times after that. The riders fire upon White's filibuster, and the filibuster attempts to fire back. The kid's horse sank beneath him with a long pneumatic sigh. He had already fired his rifle, and now he sat on the ground and fumbled with his shot pouch. A man near him sat with an arrow hanging out of his neck. He was bent slightly as if in prayer. The kid would have reached for the bloody hoop iron point, but then he saw that the man wore another arrow in his breast to the fletching, and he was dead. Everywhere there were horses down and men scrambling, and he saw a man who sat charging his rifle while blood ran from his ears, and he saw men with their revolvers disassembled trying to fit the spare-loaded cylinders they carried, and he saw men kneeling who tilted and clasped their shadows on the ground, and he saw men lanced and caught up by the hair and scalped standing, and he saw the horses of war trampled down the fallen, and a little white-faced pony with one clouded eye leaned out of the murk and snapped at him like a dog and was gone. Among the wounded, some seemed dumb and without understanding, and some were pale through the mask of dusk, and some had fouled themselves or tottered brokening onto the spears of the savages. All hell is breaking loose around the kid, but he was going to give mercy to the soldier next to him, but he saw he was dead. I think that this was interesting. While the kid may have a taste for violence, it's these small acts that separate him and his humanity from the company he keeps. He's sitting here in the middle of a nightmare. There's death and blood and violence all around him. One by one, the people he rode here with are dying all around him, and he's witnessing it. Can you imagine what this was like for him to see something so brutal as this happening right there in front of him, and him being a part of it? And now the horses of the dead came pounding out of the smoke and dust, encircled with flapping leather and wild manes, and eyes widened with fear like the eyes of the blind, and some were feathered with arrows, and some lang through and stumbling and vomiting blood as they wheeled across the killing round and clattered from sight again. Dust staunched the wet and naked heads of the scalped, who with the front of hair below their wounds and punctured to the bone now lay like maimed and naked monks in the blood-slaked dust, and everywhere the dying groaned and gibbered and horses lay screaming. The Comanche warriors win the day. And that is the end of chapter 4. Let me know your thoughts on chapters 2, 3, and 4 down below in the comment section. Did you pick up on something different than I did? Do you find significance in a passage in these chapters that I didn't share? If you're reading Blood Meridian for the first time, how has your experience been so far? If you like this breakdown, don't forget to like and subscribe. In the next video, I'll be tackling chapters 5 through 8. Until next time, bye-bye.